July 16, 1945. The world's first atomic bomb, a highly classified, incredibly secret experiment buried deep out in the deserts of New Mexico. Now, we all know this is undeniably one of the absolute most pivotal moments in human history. But, today on The Explainer, we're going to do something a little different. We are going to explore a genuinely terrifying what if. What if history had unfolded differently? Like, what if that first nuclear test had actually failed? Well, let's dive right into this incredibly fragile alternate reality.
So just picture it. Imagine the countdown reaching zero on that fateful morning. You've got all these brilliant scientists literally holding their breath as the detonator fires exactly on schedule. Every single calculation appears absolutely perfect. And then, nothing. No blinding flash, no iconic mushroom cloud, just a terrifying anticlimactic fizzle. And that one single instant, humanity's most ambitious project, produces nothing but total confusion and a deadly scattering of radioactive plutonium. It's a moment that would have taken history down a path literally no one had ever imagined.
Let's break down exactly what could have gone wrong here. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The firing circuit activates. All 32 detonators receive their electrical signals perfectly in sync. But somewhere inside that incredibly complex system, a tiny, almost invisible imperfection changes everything. We're talking about a fraction of a microsecond delay, or maybe a microscopic crack, and instead of a beautifully symmetrical implosion, the core just tears itself apart. You get a conventional chemical explosion, sure, but absolutely zero nuclear chain reaction.
So if the bomb just doesn't work, what happens next? Would World War II drag on for months or, even years? Would Hiroshima and Nagasaki never actually experience nuclear destruction? And would the United States be forced into a brutal, grinding ground invasion of Japan? You see, these aren't just fun hypotheticals for us to ponder. These are the immediate, terrifying strategic nightmares the Allied commanders would suddenly be staring down.
Okay, to really understand the sheer panic this failure would cause, we actually have to flash back to 1939. Driven by this terrifying, very real fear that Nazi scientists might unlock nuclear fission first, the U.S. launched the Manhattan Project. 100,000. That is the number of people employed at its peak, spread out across hidden cities, massive factories, and secret labs. It was, quite frankly, an industrial effort of unimaginable scale, all completely draped in absolute secrecy.
So the crucial point here is how this specific bomb was actually designed. J. Robert Oppenheimer oversaw a design based on implosion over at Los Alamos. Basically, this meant compressing a hollow plutonium sphere using these precisely shaped explosive lenses, and they had to detonate exactly simultaneously. We're talking about timing measured in millionths of a second. It was, without a doubt, one of the greatest engineering synchronization problems ever attempted by humans.
Now, in our real history, this massive gamble totally paid off. The actual Trinity test successfully released energy equivalent to 21,000 tons of TNT, literally melting the desert sand into this eerie green radioactive glass. But back in our alternate timeline, that 21,000 tons of force, never happens. So instead of proving to the world that the atomic age has arrived, the military's just left staring at a dirty radioactive crater. They'd suddenly realize their absolute greatest wartime gamble is nowhere near ready for combat.
And this failure? It would instantly trigger a massive geopolitical crisis. Picture this. President Harry Truman is way over in Potsdam, Germany, sitting directly across from Joseph Stalin. Historically, getting the news of Trinity's success gave Truman this incredible diplomatic leverage to help shape the post-war world. But here, in this timeline, he receives a coded message of utter failure. Basically, overnight, his strategic options just evaporate. He loses all that leverage, and he has to face the very grim reality that a quick end to the Pacific War is rapidly slipping away.
Without the bomb, military leaders have no choice but to pivot immediately to this, Operation Downfall. This was going to be a colossal two-part amphibious invasion of the Japanese home islands. You've got Phase 1, Operation Olympic, targeting Kyushu in November of 1945, and then Phase 2, Operation Coronet, striking right near Tokyo in the spring of 1946. Guys, we are talking about millions of Allied soldiers deployed in an assault that would have completely dwarfed even D-Day.
And the projected casualties for this invasion? Utterly horrifying. Estimates ran well into the hundreds of thousands for American troops alone, with Japanese civilian and military casualties expected to be astronomically higher than that. To put that into perspective, the U.S. actually pre-manufactured such a massive supply of Purple Heart medals just for this exact invasion that they are literally still being issued to soldiers today.
That is how bloody they expected this to be.
Meanwhile, back at Los Alamos, there's a total psychological collapse going on, not to mention a massive physical problem. See, before the test, engineers built this thing called Jumbo. It was a 200-ton steel vessel meant to contain the blast if it fizzled, which would allow them to recover the precious, incredibly rare plutonium. But they confidently decided not to use it. Well, in our alternate reality, that overconfidence is an absolute disaster. You'd have scientists in primitive, clunky radiation gear forced to literally scour the desert sand for scattered plutonium, losing critical, precious time.
Section 1. Operation Ketsugo, the decisive operation. So, while America is preparing for an incredibly grueling invasion, Japan is gearing up for a ruthless homeland defense strategy of its own. Now, this wasn't necessarily about winning an outright military victory. It was specifically designed to make the American invasion so unbearably bloody that the U.S. would just abandon its demand for unconditional surrender. We're talking thousands of hidden aircraft being prepped for expanded kamikaze attacks on troop transports. You had civilians literally extracting fuel from pine tree roots just to keep those planes flying. Whole mountains were hollowed out into fortified caves. And perhaps most chillingly, you had the Patriotic Citizens Fighting Corps. This meant arming millions of everyday civilians, even teenagers, with whatever they had on hand, including bamboo spears, getting them ready to fight and die on the beaches. Which brings us to a really crucial historical pivot point, the Kyujo incident. In our reality, Emperor Hirohito recorded a surrender broadcast in August 1945, and these radical army officers actually staged a coup to try and destroy it so they could continue the war. They only failed because they couldn't find the hidden recording. But remember, that surrender decision was heavily influenced by the overwhelming shock of the atomic bombs being dropped. Now, in our alternate timeline, without the sudden shock of an atomic attack, those radical officers might have actually had way more time and support. Think about it. If the coup succeeds and the emperor's recording is destroyed, Japan doesn't surrender uniformly at all. Instead, we get completely fragmented chaos. The military fractures. Some units might surrender, sure, but others would fight to the bitter end independently. The American invasion forces would essentially be stepping into a nation rapidly descending into total political and military anarchy.
Section 2. The Soviet Advance, August 1945.
Right, so just when you think the situation couldn't possibly get any more complex, we have to introduce the ultimate geopolitical wildcard, Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union. Back in August 1945, the Red Army launched a massive lightning-fast invasion of Japanese-occupied Manchuria, just absolutely crushing the Japanese forces there with breathtaking speed. In our real timeline, Japan surrendered before the Soviets could push much further. But here, with an American invasion delayed by the Trinity failure, Stalin gains his most valuable weapon of all, time. That extra time allows the Soviet forces to launch a bold amphibious landing right on the northern Japanese island of Hokkaido. They could easily establish a permanent foothold in the north, all while the U.S. is still bogged down planning their southern invasion.
Which leads us straight to the most chilling geopolitical consequence of all. Just like Germany, Japan becomes divided. Imagine a communist North Japan backed by Moscow, staring down a capitalist South Japan backed by Washington. You'd have families permanently separated, railways completely divided, and a brand new, highly volatile front line for the Cold War drawn right smack through the middle of the Japanese home islands. It would have completely rewritten the entire balance of global power.
Now, back in the U.S., the Manhattan Project would have eventually rebuilt the bomb, sure, but this delay, it changes absolutely everything. A delayed atomic age means extended, brutal conventional warfare. It means global nuclear arms development actually slows down, simply because the world didn't witness that immediate, terrifying proof of concept back in 1945. It even alters the trajectory of civilian nuclear technology. We are talking about shifting the entire timeline of 20th century scientific progress.
Tiny engineering details, almost invisible to the human eye, could decide the fate of nations. It really is a profound realization, isn't it? The destiny of millions of people, the division of entire nations, the very start of the Cold War, all of it rested on millionths of a second and microscopic measurements in the New Mexico desert. It really goes to show that history isn't inevitable, it is astonishingly, terrifyingly fragile.
So, we come back to this massive question. What if the first nuclear test had actually failed? Would the United States still have won the war through a massive invasion? Would the Soviet Union have permanently divided Japan? Or would an entirely different, unpredictable chain of events have reshaped the modern world in ways we can scarcely even imagine today? You know,
History is shaped by the moments that happened, but sometimes the moments that almost happened are even more powerful. I'd love to hear what you guys think, so share your thoughts down below, and let's keep the discussion thoughtful. If you enjoyed this explainer, definitely like and subscribe for more structured deep dives into fascinating topics like this. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.